Colleen, Karl, and her husband Steve, they are very, very active in the Chowan Edenton Environmental Agency, which is the agency that helps us think about and learn about our waterways and to protect them. So they're very active. Steve was out at my place this weekend responding to a notification I gave him, so I really appreciate that. Colleen is a science education specialist. She retired from North Carolina State University. She still works with rural schools and community organizations to promote place-based environmental opportunities. So that she's very, very active in our community. She's lived here for 40 years. She got a BS from Long Island University, and she got her master's from BCU in science education. So, and her first degree was marine science. So she's very versatile, and she is, I gotta look at that, the National Board Certified Educator for Adolescents in Youth Science. I want you to welcome Colleen.
Oh my goodness. Let me get the last one.
Long. Okay, good. So we're going to make this as informal. I've been told I need to use a mic. I'm not that soft-spoken. Anybody that knows me already knows that. But I think this will help, especially if there's questions from the audience, because sometimes it is hard because there's a very good acoustics in this room. And I want to make sure that we answer questions that are burning in your mind, and you don't want to wait till the end to answer. Somebody, and it's okay with me. I mean, if you're like, oh, I gotta ask this, that's fine. This is going to be as informal as I hope is informal today. I put some PowerPoint notes together only to guide my thoughts a little bit. But I just want to say the last time I saw Lucy, we were in the middle of a driveway out there. I don't know what time of day it was, but it was hot, really hot. And we were all sweating because we were taking water samples and doing our technical thing out there. She came down the driveway kind of wondering who we were. I was like, oh yeah, okay. It's kind of like the strange people in my driveway. But in any case, we've been sampling all up and down the Chowan River this summer. And as you well know, for those of you that live near the water, I'm just curious here. How many live up the Chowan River? Raise your hands. I'm going up the river, okay? How many of you live sort of down on the other side of the river, by the sound? Okay, it's about half and half. Okay, that's good. Because or in town for that matter. The blooms have been probably the worst I've seen them since 2015. And that says a lot, because in 2015, nothing had happened in the Chowan for 30 years. There was a fertilizer plant upstream by Tunis on the other side here. It's above Colleen. And they were dumping fertilizer into the river. And of course that spurred a whole bunch of algal blooms. And the EPA got involved, 2 different districts for the EPA. And a bunch of citizen scientists got their act together and they said, okay, we've got to put this to rest. And they did. So they went full force after the fertilizer factory. They got them closed down. And so that actually took care of the problem for about 30, 35 years. And all of a sudden, in 2015, stuff was back. And no good reason for it. Nobody knew it was coming. We were driving down Water Street, and I sort of remember this day because I said to my husband, what is that? Right in front of the Hayes Bridge. I mean, it was like emerald green. I'm like, what is that? And he says, that looks like a blue-green algae bloom. It can't be. I said, it sure does. I, unrolled my window to take a picture because I wanted to capture that and send it to a few of my friends at State saying, you're not going to believe what's over here. And the minute I did, I'm like a canary in a coal mine. I immediately get filled up. My sinuses start to yell at me, and I get a headache. And it was almost instantaneous. So I quickly rolled the window back up, and I said, okay, I got my pictures. Let's go home. I'm going to send these off. The blooms since 2015 have been on and off. 2017 was also a pretty bad year. 2019, Steve and Ronnie and I were out in the middle of the river, and we were taking samples, and the entire river was green. Green from one end to the other, one side to the other. That was a bad year, but it didn't persist. It didn't stay around. And this year, and then it got quiet. And of course, our commissioners are always quick to say, it's over, isn't it? It's like, we wish it were. But it looks good for a couple of years where there really hasn't been any predominant blooms over the last few years. And folks get a little complacent with that. They say, okay, well, things have gotten better. We must be doing something right. I wish I could say that. And these are really unpredictable things. There's so many out factors that are affecting how these blooms develop, when they develop. And if you'll remember this year, nothing really happened until the end of July. Now that's strange because we've seen blooms as early as Memorial Day here. And so we're thinking, okay, this is gonna be another good year, no blooms, right? Then at the end of July, it just exploded everywhere. And those of you that live on the Sound know it's on the Sound. Those of you that live, off the river know that it's on both sides of the river, depending on which way the winds are blowing. Because, it's the chock full, right in the middle of the river. You can see the satellite imagery. It's all there. We have fishermen friends that are out there, and they say it's just as green as can be. And so it really hasn't gone away. It fades out a little bit when we get some rain. It sort of, sinks down, and then nice warm weather again, like we're having the last few days. And it just boom again. So how long is it going to last? I've had many questions on Facebook about that. I don't know. I mean, the water's still warm out there. This is the latest I think we've seen it. I think it's got to be the latest that we've ever seen them in this area. But what's causing it? We're going to talk about a little bit today, and we're also going to talk about some of the projects that we've done since 2015. In 2015, we knew very little. The experts in Raleigh said, we don't have any data on the Chowan because it's so quiet over there. Nothing is happening ever. And then what's going on now? So the data was really sketchy. And if you're doing science and you're trying to put together pieces of a puzzle, you need some good information. And so every year we have partnered with the university partner on a project or two and gotten involved and started to answer a few questions. We had no clue where to look. As people said, well, it's the farmers. If they're fertilizing too much, the farmers are going to tell you, oh, no, fertilizer is very expensive. They're not going to waste it, and they're not, okay? But there are things that maybe could be corrected in terms of farming, not necessarily an overuse of fertilizer. There's a ton of other issues that have happened since really the 70s when the problem was just a fertilizer plant. Right now, it's multiple different things that are coming into the river that are causing the outbreaks or the blooms. And for us to understand that, we really have to take a lot of data. We really have to be out there looking and recording information as much as we can. Okay, you want to advance that to the next slide, please? The CEEG mission has been really since the inception of the program, which was 2007, to actually educate the public about environmental issues and to bring the experts to us. We've been working with folks at NC State. We've been working with folks at UNC. We've been working with folks this year, actually with Duke. And that's a whole other focus. But every project that we do, we learn more about one aspect of these algal blooms. And we actually do special programs. Those kind of died off a little bit with COVID, as everybody's did. And we had to rethink a few things. And since then, we've been awfully busy with these special projects. Last year, for example, we spent the entire year sampling on the tributaries here in town. I mean, all the way up to where it's just a little dribble to where it comes out into the Sound. We wanted to make sure that we were catching different points where fertilizers or anything else might be coming into that stream, a hotspot more or less. So, we did that. So we've been busy doing a lot of things, but 10 years ago in 2015, when the bloom started, the focus for the CEEG sort of became this water quality problem. I mean, everybody was saying to us, what can we do to fix it? What can we do to amend it? We need some programming, we need to learn more. And they were right, we did. And so we really kind of took on that as a big chunk. I mean, I think that there is a recycling program that's still going on. The CEEG started doing some of that way back in 2007, but we sort of focused our attention the last few years on the water quality issue. I read a lot, and I see that even in the Chesapeake Bay, they've been pouring millions of dollars into that project up there for 50 years, okay? They're still fighting problems up there. They haven't cleaned it up yet. That's a huge body of water. So is the Albemarle Sound. And our river comes right to that Albemarle Sound. So we want to make sure that if we can do something up here, that we actually take some action in this area to maybe keep the Sound protected a little bit longer. Okay.
Colleen, what does CEEG stand for?
Chowan, yeah, it's a big mouthful, that's why it's CEG. Chowan Edenton Environmental Group, okay? Yeah. Next slide, please. All right, I want to hear from you guys. Pulled these pictures, they're not copyrighted, I was very careful of that, okay? But these are the old pictures of this area. And I want to know, things have changed a little bit since then, sort of. Is there anything the same? Is there anything that we do that's still the same?
Not as much herring fishing.
What's that?
Herring.
Herring, okay, so that the guys are pulling herrings. So that's changed a little bit because of the moratorium on herring, because some of that population has decreased over the years. As a matter of fact, to the point where they had to put a ban on it for a few years back. But the herring were so plentiful up here. And a lot of their habitat has been destroyed. That's why the population dwindled. And of course, they probably overfished. You know, back in the 1900s, they probably took as many as they wanted to without really taking account, like the fisheries biologists do today. Yeah, is there anything else that's similar to what we do today, or, you know, some things that have changed?
We still use, transport with the new core.
Yeah, so,
But we used to transport tobacco and fish and.
sure. So the transport thing, now the slide on the bottom there, the big barges that moved produce or whatever, maybe tobacco products or cotton, whatever was being shipped around. When, you know, we use the waterways to do that, and you're right, we still use the waterways to do that today. How many of you have seen a barge going down the Chowan River? The big ones from Newport. Yeah, and I understand, this is what I've been reading at least, there's gonna probably be, at least they're thinking about it, a couple more side industries up in that area that are gonna sort of bounce off of what Newport's already doing. So that probably will increase river traffic as well, you know, and over time. I'm not sure that that's a done deal yet, but the speculation is out there, let's put it that way. Anything else there? Do we still fish?
Yes.
Well, those ladies were having a good time there. I got a kick out of that slide. I said, they look like more fun than the guys out there fishing. Yes, for sure. I think we fish a lot. And that is something that bothers me a great deal, especially when we have these prolific blooms and people are out there fishing. I'm thinking, I don't know. But they, they seem to still want to do that, even if the water is, pea green, split pea green. How about the agricultural stuff? Do we use those canals? Anybody that going on?
Dig down and build haven in that area.
Yeah, I think we do. I mean, we did a lot of irrigation in the past using our waterways as a water supply. And so we still are doing that in many places. I can remember years working down at Bennett's Mill Pond, seeing a tractor down there with a motor on it, pulling water out of Rocky Hog Creek to water the crops that were uphill, okay? So they were doing that a long time, and they're still doing it. And then the last one up there, how about the mill house? What about that one? Those are mostly gone now. I know a lot of the mills are, but then we use the waterways heavily for that. I was surprised to learn over by Lucy's part of the world, over in Bertie County, that the drop-off is so extreme. It really is, because you've got some high banks over there.
63 feet at my home.
Yeah, I mean, it's flat over here. But, over across the river, because of the way the geology is built in this area, it's, old seabeds and, back and forth ocean stuff and deposits. There's some very high ridges over there, and that was really important for the folks that lived in that area around the 1800s. They used that gravity feed to run the water for their mills, and they were always at the end of these streams that went into the Chowan River. Lots of lumber and certainly lots of grain. Over here, it was all water driven, and they just hoped like heck that they had a lot of rain, because otherwise there was nothing else to move that water. Okay, so if it got dry up, and it did on occasions, they couldn't grind their grain or do anything like that. But the big lumber mills, especially on the north side of the river, are very prominent. They were early in the 1800s at least. Okay, next slide. Oh, I didn't ask you what was important to you. What's important to you about the river? Recreation, yeah. I think so. I mean, I see a lot of people come into this area. I'll put this back up here. A lot of people come into, I'm going to forget that. A lot of people come into this area because of recreation. They like to sail. They like to fish. They've got, I love the boats now that remind me of, if I lived on the Mississippi, I'd be going up there like the Albemarle Queen, taking those night rides. That's great stuff, and I think that brings tourists in, and it does a lot for our economy. And so we certainly want to keep these waters, clean for that reason. Anything else that's important to you guys about the waterways?
How's your condition? preservation of natural resources, like
Say it again.
preservation of natural resources like the marine.
The whole 9 yards, because once we start to lose the water quality, we lose habitat, and then we lose the species that are reliant on those particular areas. And without a question, that is an issue, okay, all over the place, and certainly in the Chowan as well. Okay, all right, well, I figured you guys would be right on the mark with that. Next one is fine. So, this is 2015. When we were just aghast. We took lots of pictures that year. We didn't know what the heck was going on, except this was a blue-green algae bloom, and we had no really good clue as to where or how it was forming or why it was here. And we also don't know if it was anyplace else besides Edenton Bay, because that's all we saw. We had a couple friends up the river that said, yeah, it's going on up here too, but really our pictures were limited to this side of the river. We didn't go way up to Gates County and take a look or anything like that. So our view was limited then, but even so, it was pretty prolific. It lasted for about 4 weeks in Edenton Bay for an entire month. It was just, first is that shamrock green color, then it turns that lovely turquoise, or that cyan, that's where the name comes, cyan color, because these are not algae, and I shouldn't even call them that. They're bacteria. Okay, that's their formal name is cyanobacteria, and that's that blue-green color they get when they start to die, when they start to decompose. So you can see this is actually Hayes Bridge there, that nice little swampy looking area there. And that bottle of water that the little cursor is hiding there was, not duckweed, it was all algae or cyanobacteria. Okay, next one. So things got a little quiet until this year. Raise your hand if you've seen water this color this year. That's why everybody's here. Yeah. Yeah, it really hasn't stopped since the end of July. We've seen a couple of times when we think it's gonna go away, it's nice and quiet, now we haven't seen the blooms pop up someplace else. And you can watch the winds change, and I know some of you do, you're very savvy about that. If it's blowing from the northeast, the stuff's all piled up on Bertie's side. It's blowing from the southwest, we get it over here, okay? The river is full of it right now. Without question, I know people that sit in this room that have been out in the middle of the river taking samples, and it's just full. So it's going to take a while for that stuff to get out. One of the professors that we deal with or talk with, this is Hans Pearl, actually sent me an email this morning. He said, Colleen, he said, you think it's because, you guys haven't had a whole lot of rain? Well, that's a good point. We haven't had a lot of rain. And he said the Chowan River has a very long residence time if there's nothing flushing it out. So that means if we don't have any rain, stuff is going to just stay around here and stay around here and that's what's happening. Okay, so we really need, a big rainfall. Like I kind of helped with a tropical storm a couple weeks ago, might come up I don't want a hurricane now, don't get me wrong. But some rain, please, okay? We really need that to actually move the water out of the Chowan River, and then of course it's going to go into the Albemarle Sound. And it doesn't die out there either, but that's a bigger body of water. So hopefully it dilutes a little bit out there. Okay, these are a problem everywhere now. I mean, people say, can't we do anything about it? Every magazine, book you pick up, article in a newspaper has articles about cyanobacteria. Every country, every state, they're all dealing with this stuff. In Canada, the lakes are so cold up there, they say, we'd never see it up here. Yeah, they're seeing it. Okay, so, yes, sir.
Is it both a freshwater and a saltwater problem?
That's a very, very good question. These particular ones that are in our river can tolerate some salinity, but they are not a saltwater species. Okay, there are a whole complement of saltwater species that are out there. You've heard of them before, the red tide, things like that. Those are all the complement organisms that are like the cyanobacteria in freshwater. So they're predominantly fresh, okay, but they can tolerate these particular genera that are in our river can tolerate a fair amount of salinity, okay, before they, is too salty. Now, somebody asked me that question the other day about the satellite imagery, because if you go towards the Outer Banks, the satellites show us that it looks really green out there, that there's cyanobacteria blooms out there. Probably not. That's false imagery. What's happening there is picking up something else. I think when these guys get out into what I would call almost ocean salinity, 35 parts per thousand, they're not going to make it, okay? So they can't tolerate that. So there's a cutoff point there. I think Nathan Hall told me one time about 14 parts, 12 to 14 they can go up to, but that's about half a seawater concentration, actually a little bit less than that. So, Yeah, they can handle some, but not a whole lot. And we get mixing here too. You know, it's salt water underneath everything here right now. That's why the crabbers are out there. There's plenty of salt water there, and if it gets mixed up, then, you know, you're gonna have some churning and they'll have to tolerate that, or they die, one of the two. Yeah, go ahead, Cheryl.
I was just wondering, does the Pamlico have something that's, you know, as bad? Obviously, it's not as bad as we are because we're more fresh.
Right.
But does it have very
The Pamlico also has freshwater blooms. They're like we are. Once you get out of that boundary that gets you more towards the outer banks, it gets more saline. Okay, so inland where Morehead City is and stuff like that, it's
And
pretty.
they're seeing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh,
So, yes.
Two questions. Number one, sorry, making crab pots for voters.
Say it again?
Have the crabbers said, oh, the crabs are dying, or have they been affected by these blooms? Have you heard anything, or have you not heard?
Okay, so I have to be careful about this one. You know, the book is not open or closed about any science research is always ongoing. And people like to say, ooh, I got the answer to that, and then all of a sudden it's disputed by somebody else, you know. I always like to appreciate the fact that scientists, but what we know right now is it tends to concentrate, the toxins that are given off by these blooms tend to concentrate in fatty tissues. So most of us do not eat the fatty tissues of fish. Okay, you'd be cleaning that out. Okay, all those things that are in there that are kind of, they get cleaned out. Okay, crabs are another story because a lot of people will eat the entire crab, especially if it's a soft shell, right? You know, they put it in, they fry it up, and it's never been for me, but honestly, they do. I think you're okay if you're having just the muscle, you know, so if you've got a big plate of crab legs there, I'm thinking the Alaska kind, not necessarily the blue claws, but you know, big Alaska, you know, the big crab legs. I think you're fine with that because that's a muscle tissue. You know, that's not necessarily the insides. But, and as I said, one of the things that I was surprised at when we first moved here was the whole soft shell crab stuff. I never really saw that before, where they just pop the whole thing in the fryer and eat you know, 9 yards. Yes, yes.
Colleen, a lot of people, including me, clean out that fatty apron even when we're having soft shell.
Yeah.
It's actually fairly common.
You didn't hear that?
Yeah.
So
Crab butter.
Yeah, I think, you know, again, I'd be careful about that. There's a big crabbing business up here. I think that's one of the reasons why the Chesapeake has put so much money into their research, especially because they also have a lot of crabs. And they also take a lot from that body of water, but they're very, shellfish are a little different than, you know, regular bony fish, for sure. And I think that it's a very gray area as to, you know, how we handle that at this point. But, yeah, careful.
Is there somebody looking into that though? I know.
Yeah,
Ashley was looking at- you were
yes,
talking
there's
about fish last year.
plenty of researchers that right now, and one at NC State that we work a lot with, and it actually has been taking samples. She contacted us 2 years ago and said, do you know some fishermen out there? I said, I think we do. We know they got the Bass Club. We know those guys pretty well. And so we called them up and we had a little meeting, and she asked them for about 3 months to go out and collect fish samples and put them in a bag and put them on the ice and then freeze them. And then she collected them. And so she was running all sorts of analysis on food chain distribution. In other words, how those toxins move up the food chain from the little things that they eat all the way up to, you know, the bodies that they have. And her work at this point is pretty much definite on, it's not really showing up in the muscle tissue. However, the soft tissues or the fatty tissues, there is some. Depends on what load of toxins in the water. And as you know, this is a very gray area. Maybe some of you don't know this. The toxins that are emitted by these algal blooms are really, really unpredictable. Okay, we don't have a good handle on when they produce toxins, how much they produce, what causes them to do it. Okay, we're taking data now this all year for Duke, and we're trying to wrap our heads around just a little piece of that, just to try to understand it. We're not the only researchers that are looking at this problem as well. You know, they can produce a fair amount of toxin, and they are short-term and long-term. And I was going to talk about that later, but I'll mention it now. The short-term stuff has immediate effects. We were working with a researcher a couple of years ago. Saw her put her hand in the water with a glove on, and the water went above the glove level. She took her glove off about, what was it, Steve? A couple, maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes later. Took her glove off, and you can see a red ring around her arm as to, she was very sensitive. So she was like I am with the allergies, you know, the congestion and stuff. her skin just broke out, bright red band right around her arm. Okay, so you can get skin, problems. You can get the asthma stuff, like the sneezing and the coughing and the, I'm filled up. You can get the headaches. We were filming with Duke at the end of July this year. The videographers that were out there with us, and it was very nasty that day, right down here at the end of the Barker House. One of them got a headache so bad that she had to go home and skip dinner. That's very common. Headaches are really common with these things. She was barely able to do her job. She got up the next day and did it, but it was not pleasant. So everybody has different, some people don't. My husband can smell it. I don't smell it at all because I'm so stuffed up most of the time, but he smells it right away. He's out with the door and I can smell it. That's not the toxins probably that you're smelling. Those are other compounds, they're smell compounds that are given off by these blooms. And they're probably not harmful, but we don't really know that either, okay? So there's a variety of smells. Sometimes, a couple of years ago, I could still smell them. It sort of tastes like a metal taste in your mouth, like you've been chewing on a piece of, steel or something. That's how I feel it, but you can smell, it's a very disgusting, dirty smell. But that's part of the algal bloom, but it's not the toxins, okay? They probably don't have any smell. All right. I want to point out the last picture up there really quickly. That's a NOAA satellite picture. That's available every day. You can find it and just look at our CEEG Facebook page, and I'm always posting stuff up there. You can go online and look at that. Unfortunately, it's a day, behind. So it's yesterday's picture because they have to process it, so you can't ever see, not yet, you can't ever see real time as to where those blooms are. We get reports all over the place, but somebody called me today and said it's up here in Chowan Beach. And I said, okay, I thought it was going to be a couple of days from now, but so folks are sort of letting us know where it pops up. Again, a lot of it is the winds because right now the river is just chock full of it. All right, that one picture down there is a micrograph of one of the genre that we do have in here. There are two predominantly that have shown up for the last 10 years. That is microcystis, that produces a toxin. Delicious spermum, that produces a toxin, or several. And there's a new one this year that we've seen more of, and I'll be darned if I can ever say it. They call it Alfie for short. It's called apomenzon, okay? But it's these are handful words to pronounce, that's why they have these little shortcuts for people to say. But we haven't really seen that one until this year. There's a lot of that out there this year. Not sure why, but it is, and it looks a little different. Now, two of these can actually produce their own food. So when things get slim, this is really strange. These little bacteria have adapted so well, they're nitrogen fixers. So they can take atmospheric nitrogen and turn it into usable energy for themselves. So, not to worry, if there's no nitrogen left in the body of water, it's okay, they'll just make their own. And so they do that, you can see that, I don't think you can see it on that slide, but there are specialized cells that are actually in the body of that it's not really multi-cells, but they sort of join up as a gang, because these are all single cells, but they look like colonies in a way. And they do have these specialized cells that can produce nitrogen or fix nitrogen. Next one. All right, so not to belabor all the things that we've learned over the last 10 years, but right away we got interested in, okay, nutrient overloading. That's got to be the problem, right? We figured in 2016 we had an opportunity to work with the Council of Government and RC&D, which is Albemarle Resources and Conservation District. Those acronyms are tough, but they're very prominent here. And they got some grant money, and they said, okay, you asked us to take samples. And so what we did is we took samples in a variety of places, and we sent those samples off because we don't have an analytical lab close by. So they went off to a lab to get analyzed to look at the total amount of nutrients that were in those samples. That told us some stuff, but it really didn't tell us a lot. So we actually did that for 4 or 5 years and continued it on until 2018. And I finished it up actually in 23. We ended up sampling. I really got tired of looking at Pottacasey Creek. That's an east-west creek. I think we were over there once a month for probably 5 years, taking samples, 5 different locations, because DEQ, our environmental organization in this state, knew that there was a whole lot of organic nitrogen that was coming in at the outflow of that creek. That's way up above Holiday Island, okay, so it's up by Gates County. They knew that, and they know that for a long time. So we set out to figure out, well, where's it coming from? And actually, after 5 years of work out there, we do know where there's some hot spots up there. And you know what's causing it? We don't know. I mean, people have said, well, it's because there's a lot of deer up there. I'm like, I don't think so. But anyhow, things have changed. Certainly, there are a lot of chicken farms up there now. There weren't there in the past. There's a lot of garbage up there. I mean, some of the stuff that we saw up there that was just thrown into the woods was like, ooh, really? But so there's a lot of, stuff that needs to be corrected in terms of ecology in that area. But nonetheless, we sort of fleshed that project out so that the last work that we did on those nutrient samples actually involved Chris Osborne at NC State, who has a really cool technique where he uses fluorescence to discern what the organic nitrogen is coming from. So it's a modeling program. So the more data he feeds it, the more accurate that model gets. And he can tell, if he gets a sample, if it's stuff that's coming out of sewage from somebody's leaky septic system, or he can tell if it's animal waste, or he can tell if it's detritus from the swamp, literally by running this program on fluorescence. So every bit of work that we've done since then with Chris has told us not only what the concentration of the nutrients are, the nitrogen and phosphorus that are really essential for these cyanobacteria to grow, but also what the source is, which is hugely important, okay? So our last little project, and these were grant projects. The CCRG is a community collaborative research grant. It's a great project. They actually give money to the researchers and the community partners to, and you have to have a community partner. I mean, they don't want to do it with just the scientists. They want the community partners. So we've always been raising our hand on that one. So we'll do this, because we're interested in learning, and we have learned a ton of information. Our last project out of CCRG was with Chris, and both, we did nutrient and dissolved organic nitrogen on the tributaries of Edenton. And we used Filbert's Creek and Queen Anne's Creek. And we went up as far as where the peanut factory is. I mean, the peanut processing plants. That's where some of Queen Anne's Creek actually starts. It's a little trickle up there. But we worked that stream all the way down to where it outflows by Hayes Bridge down here. And we probably took 6 locations on Queen Anne's and about 4 on Filbert's, the same thing, all the way up to where the source was. And we actually were able to tell the town council where there were some spots that really needed some remediation. It showed up very clearly as, these are spots that are hot spots. These are spots where there's some excessive nutrients coming in, and we can tell you the source, and maybe you need to do something about putting something there like a constructed wetland or something like that to help absorb it, okay? All right, our last work, go ahead. In 2004, Duke University called us and said, we've been working with Albemarle Regional Health on some problems that we're noticing in the Chowan, Hertford, Elizabeth City area. And I said, well, tell me more. They said, well, you guys are a hot spot for neurological disorders. And I said, well, I need to know more about that. What are you saying? She said, well, we've mapped it. And she said, we have a high number of cases of Parkinson's, Lou Gehrig's, Alzheimer's in this area. And she said, there are places in New England that are like that as well. And so they have, at that point, they had already set up some, I guess you would call them clinics, where people came in and they gave blood. And so they're actually biomarking all this. So they've got a whole cadre of folks from all of the eastern North Carolina counties that they're going to be studying long term. None of this is like, it's not going to happen tomorrow, all right? This is like a 20-year study, right? I told Lisa, I said, I'm glad you're young and it's not me that's doing this because, it's going to take a whole lot of time for her to put all this information together, but she's set to do that. So in 2014, she said, we need more information because we're not sure what the causative agent of these things might be. I said, well, that's interesting. She said, it could be all that stuff they spray in the air around there for all the crops that you guys grow. I said, oh, you mean those little helicopters or those planes that fly over and just randomly spray? She said, yeah, actually, it could be that. Those are orthophosphates, a lot of them for the cotton and stuff like that. Or it could be what's coming off the algal blooms. I said, oh, okay, that's why you want to talk to us. She said, yeah, that's why. So, we we entered into a very in-depth conversation, and we're actually partnering with Albemarle Regional Health. We have 2 partners up there that do the same thing that we do here. But our job for the next 2 years, until the end of, probably the middle of 2026, is to actually take samples all up and down the Chowan River. And we have 11 sites. It's our, we finally call it, we call it our Chowan Chicken Run, because the only place that we have to stop for a bathroom break is in Winton, that has a bathroom, it's a Shell station, and it also has a chicken bar there too. So about 10:30 in the morning, we're all going like, okay, that chicken smells mighty good. So, we stop and have our little chicken runs. So I'm gonna give Cheryl credit for that, because she's out there with the sampling all the time, and Steve too, they're the CEEG members that are here tonight. But literally, one day she said to me, are we going on a chicken run tomorrow? And just busted up, because yes, we finally call it the chicken run, because we all stop and have our chicken break. And because when you look, there's not McDonald's, I hate to say it, none of these towns have McDonald's, so we have to have a place to stop. And so, we take a little break about halfway through. The whole sample run takes us about 5 to 6 hours. So it's a lot of work, but we're putting the effort in, because these samples are being sent for nutrient analysis, they're being sent to Duke for toxin analysis. So we've got a whole lot of stuff going on with this information. And I'm of the mindset, the more we can give them, the better, okay? If we can give them more information, that's why we drove samples yesterday halfway to Duke. Okay?
So Colleen, can you explain that map's not big enough to kind of see right now? It looks like this is this Edenton Bay?
It is, yes.
Right here.
Yes,
So-
indeed.
So
And
the yellow, what is the yellow?
okay, so there's a color map, our color scale bar on the bottom. So that is from 919. So just this year, okay, just a couple weeks ago. And the red is where the cyanobacteria are most concentrated. In other words,
That's across the center.
correct. So that particular day, a day before actually, okay, so I pulled that map on the 20th. So what they put up there is the day before, because it takes a day for them to clean up the raw images and make them usable for us to take a look at. And so what they do is color ramp this stuff like a lot of meteorology maps do. So when you see red on the map, that means that, oh, that's a bad spot. Okay, lots and lots of red there. We have fishermen friends. Did Ron tell you that the Roanoke was really bad this year? That's really unusual for, to find it. Yeah.
Yesterday.
We've seen more this year in that area that I would call where Scuppernong is, and right across the bay from where a lot of development is going on in Albemarle Sound. We usually don't see blooms there. They're usually up the river, but they've been all over the place this year. So as you look, you can see some other red points up there. Looks like about Rocky Hot Creek. That's that first indentation above Edenton Bay. And then looks a little farther up, a little bit red there. It's kind of hard to see, but Arrowhead Beach area, Chowan Beach area. And it was more on our side, but there's a dot that's kind of right in the middle there, all right? So the satellites are really accurate at telling us where these things are. They use a specialized sensor for that, and they've been working on it they've had this in operation for probably about maybe 6 or 7 years now. We helped actually develop some of that stuff. We sent them chlorophyll samples from the ground when we had to filter the stuff. But now we have pretty high-tech stuff. As a matter of fact, if you could go back, no, keep on that one, I think. Yeah, keep going.
Question about
Okay,
that.
yeah.
Go back to the
Yeah,
mountains.
okay, go ahead.
We're kind of out there in Salmon Creek and the river, and where is that in relation to?
Salmon Creek. Do you want to show where Salmon Creek is out there? It's right around.
It's across the sound.
We're
Is
right
it
above
on
the
the
black
opposite
spot.
side, on the
Okay.
campus side?
It's on the other side, right above there. That's where
It'd be
right
right
below the Chowan River Bridge. Okay, so Salmon Creek
The bridge.
goes right up
The
through
bridge.
Bertie.
That
Yeah.
bridge would go across here,
Right.
and you would be coming in here, and Salmon Creek kind of zigs all the way.
So it looks like they don't have as many.
Not that day.
Not
But
that
keep
day.
in mind that this stuff daily moves around. Yeah. So
And
I
then
mean.
is the sound, or the sound's not?
Oh, yeah, that's the sound. So that would be down by, what's down there? Roper, Cresswell, thank you. Yeah, probably not as far out as Cresswell, but Roper definitely. And what's the place? It's the Mackey's Ferry, that area, okay?
We're on the sound.
Yeah,
Condo,
yeah.
but
So
then
you're-
Salmon Creek goes around.
Salmon Creek goes all the way up through, and we're not seeing the land creeks here, it's just showing the water, but Salmon Creek goes quite a ways up. We take one of our samples on Salmon Creek.
Does Salmon Creek then go into the sound?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
That's where I wanted to know where the sound is on that map.
Right, yeah. So
Salmon Creek
you're,
goes into.
it's right in that area, and, you're not showing a lot. The color's not really great on that particular slide, but, a couple days later, it's there. Okay,
We've
so,
lived here several years, we've never seen it, I knew it could be there, but we've never seen it in a sample.
I know. Well, keep in mind that most people have said they've never seen anything like this year either, okay? So it's been a really awful year. Yes, ma'am?
Yeah, I don't know if it would be helpful, but I'm actually from Erie, Pennsylvania, so
Oh.
Lake Erie.
From where?
Lake Erie.
Pennsylvania.
Ah, I'm back in mine from Rochester, so right up there where you guys have a worse problem than we do.
Well, that's what I was going to say. I worked at the Tom Bridge Center 9 years ago, so I don't know what they're doing now. But one thing in Pennsylvania they did was they restricted cows from being allowed to cross creeks because the manure from cows was a huge contaminant. Then the other thing is they armed farmers to create buffer crops because farmers are meaning to have runoff, but runoff is a huge problem up there. There's a lot of farmers.
Yeah, so we have a lot of agriculture too, not as much manure, cow manure, but their chickens is a problem in this area, at least some of the waste is. But
You might want to collaborate, you might talk to Lake Erie because if you had a national, you're talking to North Carolina.
yeah.
But I think this is such a national issue, and Lake Erie is 200 feet deep.
So the researchers that we work with in North Carolina at UNC, Hans Perl and all, they make a yearly trip up to they go up there every year because your problem is huge. You have drinking water supply that is full of this stuff. And I can't imagine having to rely on drinking water that,
Multiple sclerosis
Right.
is very prominent along the Great Lakes.
yes.
So they don't know if it's caused by that, but like you're talking about neurological issues.
Yeah, I am so impressed though. You guys, Lake Erie has done, NOAA has gotten on top of this. They have put state-of-the-art monitoring equipment up there. They have constant monitors. It's not like Steve Sherrill and I run around 11 sites, twice a month. They get constant monitoring so they get feeds every single minute coming in about what the pH is, what the oxygen is, what's the cell count. They can take this data with these automated machines. They're monitoring it like crazy, and they put this stuff up online. So you can just Google harmful algal blooms in Lake Erie, and you find a lot of information. They're doing a bang-up job up there to keep it in check, but keep in mind, that's a population that depends on that for water up there. So, yeah, it boggles my mind what some of these places are having to deal with these blooms. And we think we have it bad because it smells, and it's messing up our vacation time, or, we can't go out on our boats, or we can't fish that way. I would hate to think about your drinking supply being full of this stuff, okay? And the Great Lakes is dealing with that, not just Erie, but a lot of them, yeah. Okay, next slide is fine. All right, so this Ground Truth Project, we call it Ground Truth Project, that's what Duke called it, because we're the ground truthers. We're the folks that are out there on the ground going, hey, you're right about that. The satellites are telling us the right thing here because we're giving them information that says without question. So I looked today because I know Steve was over at Lucy's place yesterday picking up samples, and it was really rough over there. I mean, I looked at that foam and I said, ooh, bad news. And so he went over there and took our fancy device, which, by the way, is sitting in a pail in turquoise water. That was Point Comfort, sometime in the middle of August. The water was that color. Everybody said, that looks like paint. Are you sure you didn't put paint in that? I said, no, that's the color of the water. We're using a pretty sophisticated device that gives us accurate point readings wherever we are at. It's got an app on my phone, so anybody can download the app. Basically, it talks to the app and it says all the data there. It's really nice. I mean, so we get dissolved oxygen, we get pH, and we've all become very learned. Even the non-science folks that go out with us, they go, why? Why is the oxygen so low today? They get really smart about this stuff. We've seen some really wild numbers this summer in some of our water quality parameters, stuff that would really compromise an ecosystem without question, okay? pH values in the 10s. That's absurd. That's like, soapy water, really bad soapy water. And what Duke is trying to do with our information and the stuff that they're putting together, they're not only using NOAA satellites, but they're using this, it's called PlanetScape. See that picture right there? That was the middle of September. That is the Chowan River. See that green stripe down the middle? That's all blue-green algae, okay? So you can probably see somebody sunbathing on their porch on this resolution. So this is really good resolution. So what they're looking to do is kind of put all this stuff together. How many of you saw the thing the other day about the actress that they made from AI?
Yes.
All right. Well, I mean, she looks pretty real, right? Have you seen her? All the actresses in Hollywood are like really upset because this girl looks good, okay, and she's artificial. So what Duke is looking to do is combine all this information, ground information, satellite information, really close-up satellite information, and let the machine language tell us a few things, okay? Because these computers are very smart. So our goal is, after a couple of years and maybe a few more years, is we should be able to know pretty much where these blooms are and maybe where they're going to go. And that should prompt some warnings to, places like Locarno or places like the Sound where there are outbreaks that are headed their way. We don't know that yet. It would be nice if we had that information, but it's going to take a while to get there. Okay, next slide. Cheryl can tell you this is just one small piece of the data that we collect on our Chowan chicken run. Yeah, it's 11 sites and the data is extensive. So we're collecting everything imaginable on those sites using electronics to help us do that. Okay, thank God we don't have dipsticks or anything like that anymore, but we can do this pretty quickly. And some days you want to get in and out of the car really fast. There was a day this summer that the heat index was about 126, and it was really, really hot. So we didn't stay out very long. We got our sample and popped back in the air conditioning, and we were happy to do so because, it's hot in the field for sure. But, we go out early in the morning and we get what we can. Next slide, please. All right. So these are a no-brainer. Okay. So these are things that we've sort of observed over the last 10 years. Some of them are really obvious, and some of them are more because of what we've been doing, and hopefully we can share some of those with you. We do know that there's some hot spots out there. Okay, we know for a fact, and that's great because once you know where there's a place that's got a problem, you can maybe do some mitigation. And that's the hope that we can do. We know that there's multiple sources of excessive phosphorus and nitrogen coming in from all different things. I mentioned septic, there's chickens, there's all sorts of, problems with detritus coming out of the swamps when we get really heavy rainfalls. These are multiple problems that don't kind of lay out to one easy, it's that fertilizer plant up the river. Okay, so it makes it a much more complex problem. And I can't imagine what Lake Erie is dealing with up there because they got even more, a lot more farmlands and stuff like that. Our wetlands do the job of sucking up all these extra nutrients, but we're not really keeping our wetlands up like we should. We're doing way too much clear cutting. Some of them have gone away because, some of those buffer zones that they used to suck up all those nutrients are now ditched. We got, drainage canals through them and all sorts of stuff going on. So if you're kind of compromising the wetlands, then you're defeating the purpose of their role. And so we've realized that too. And then out of our control, the last 10 years, without question, have been warmer. This summer was really hot, really early. So the water's been warm. And we haven't had the excessive rainfall, but we did have it. If you remember, we had it in the very early part of the year, like February, March. We had a whole lot of rain. And if the stuff got flushed down into the river and then it was not going anyplace and it's just sitting there waiting for those algae or those cyanobacteria to use it. We already know they can cause both long-term and short-term damage. Okay, the long-term is not as obvious as the short-term. You're not going to know if you're going to come down with Parkinson's disease in 20 years, but we would like to know through some of the studies that Duke is doing in their blood work, if that does happen, because then they can start to say some causative agents that might be the problem for some of these disorders. And most of us that have been around algal blooms have experienced some sort of short-term. Either you get the runny nose, or you get the headache, or you get the skin itchy, or something like that. We wear masks, we wear gloves when we're out in the field. And if you're around this water, you really should do that as well. One of the studies that we did a couple of years ago was a study about airborne toxins. And we did everything. We took the mill pond, Bennett's Mill Pond had the raunchiest bloom for weeks on end. I said, we're going to take a generator up there and we're going to put these big EPA sensors up there because the researcher was taking air samples on the plates looking for the toxins that would be airborne. Because as stuff gets blown up by the wind, those cells aerosolize. And so her hypothesis was that those toxins were also aerosolizing. She did not find that. She found instead cells themselves were aerosolized. So whole pieces of cyanobacteria were up in the air column and they showed up on her plates. But I don't think the work is finished with that yet. We sat at Venice Mill Pond for it was about 8 hours that day and ran the generator. And, we got a lot of data, but it really didn't maybe capture what, she was hoping to capture. Still more research out there. Okay, next one. All right, so we already know they give off odors. We already know they give off toxins. We see fish kills. Have you guys seen any fish kills yet this year? Yes, you have. Okay.
Every morning I get up and go pick up all the dead catfish.
Where are you located?
The turkey boasters were having a feast.
Yeah, I've had reports of dead catfish belly up in the middle of the river, but I haven't heard anything shoreline. However, sometimes we don't see those fish kills. And I'm pretty sure, you guys correct me, but if you're reporting a fish kill, there have to be so many dead ones before actually they take it seriously. How many?
I think it's 25.
Thank you. 25, I think, is right. So that if you just see one dead fish, we were out at one day a couple years ago in the boat, and there were all these dead crabs. I mean, they were belly up, and all of us said, "Oh my word, is this the Albemarle?" And one of us said, "No, that's just some guy that had left his crabs too long in his hole, and he just emptied his hole there." Very true. So you don't really know, and they're going to have to send a team out if that happens if you get a fish kill. But the DO, or the dissolved oxygen, goes way down when these things start to die. They use up the oxygen as they decay. So you will liable to see a fish kill following any one of these really severe algal blooms. But the fish are smart. They don't stay around. I mean, if there's no dissolved oxygen, they're going to move elsewhere. It's the other stuff that can't move that's dying, okay? Yeah, all right. We really need more outreach, okay? I think this is the first year where I got really worried because I saw people jet skiing and fishing in Shamrock Green water. And honestly, I kept shaking my head going, what's happened here? Don't they understand? We can't get complacent about this. I think this is really a serious issue in our area. The folks in the Great Lakes aren't complacent about it. I can tell you that right now. So I asked the question when I was putting this together, it's like, how can we help? Next slide, please. So there's some stuff that we can do. One, we can tell people about this because some people don't even know. And people that have lived here all their lives sometimes are kind of, well, I've been okay for the last 50, 60 years, so I'm still good. We saw that one guy when he was boating one day and he kind of laughed at us and he said, I'm fine with this. And so, we need to tell them a little bit about what we're seeing here with some of the research that we're doing. And then we need to do some things that are just service things. Pick up after your pets when you're walking your dog, all right? It ends up in the sewers, it ends up down in the water. Check your septic system. We have a lot of old communities up the river, not where you guys live, but up the river there are. And some of those septic systems are a little antiquated. I wish we had some budget money to actually fix some of those. And then stuff that we can personally do. We just planted a new front yard, and I told my husband, don't fertilize it too much, but you got to put a little bit on there. Be careful with that stuff, because if it rains the next day, then it's all going to end up down the street, and then the storm drains, and then in the river. So, watch what you're doing with the fertilizers. Use your eco-friendly detergents and watch where your gray water's going. Okay, some people are recycling that. Some communities do that on a big basis. We don't, but you can kind of watch where that goes. It's usually sprayed out. And then don't cut those trees down. I mean, people get worried about hurricanes here. They cut all the big trees down, but those trees provide shade that keeps the water temperature a little bit lower, and that we really need that right now. Low water temperatures are kind of the key here. So rain gardens, and I want to just share with you, we got one more slide here real quickly. Next one. Go to the next one, okay? For a second. We got a grant with Chowan County last year to do some extensive work up at Venice Mill Pond and the repairing the docks and the walkways because they were all falling apart. That's in limbo right now because they can't find a contractor to do the work. So our secondary grant that goes along with that will provide for monies to cover a green roof, which is one of those ecologically friendly projects that helps reduce anything that might go into the waterways. You might think, okay, that's coming off my roof. Well, it's a bigger problem in cities. Well, not so much here, but it's still a demonstration project. And we'll also put in a rain garden. And those can be put in anywhere. And those are things that, especially, if you've got a spot in your yard that seems to be draining poorly, a rain garden is a great idea to help absorb those nutrients, to keep them from going into the water. And I kind of wish sometimes too, I want to have a little talk with those little trucks that run around the town that have the green stuff on them, that they carry fertilizer and they cut your lawn and they do all that stuff for you. Because sometimes I think we're not really watching what they're doing so much. You know, they're a little bit too liberal with some of their, you know, what they apply to the land. And as I said, you get a freak rainstorm. I don't know how many years some of you have lived here, but the last 10 years, I would say, we've had more rainfalls that are big events. You know, you get like 10 inches, you know, in one event, like what on earth? You never heard of that before. So that, you know, that just pushes all this stuff right out of the lawns, right down the street and into the storm drains and into the river. So anything we can do to take a little, you know, a little stab at any of that. I think rain gardens are real cool. I'm looking forward to doing the demonstration projects at Venice-Ville Pond, because we got a lot of folks that are going to help us with some native plants. And I know that there are several master gardeners sitting in this room, and they will very much help you with some native plants. You know, if you're thinking, what should I plant in this thing? Anything that's going to absorb it. You know, if you're going to take those plants away, then you're going to, you know, not have anything to suck up those nutrients like needs to. Okay, next one, please, real quickly. All right, this is my favorite quote. Please, you know, do what you can with what you have, and just make it worth your while. You know, I think in this case, I just read an article about the Hudson River the other day, and it was very disturbing because they have never seen algal blooms up the Hudson River past Albany, all the way up, you know, probably way up to wherever it goes, Watertown probably. Bad algal blooms, the worst that they've recorded history, which is 60 years of data. And they looked at what is different. They said, is it more nutrients? What is different? The only thing that's different was change of temperature of the water, okay? The only thing. So they pinpointed that by just 1 or 2 degrees elevation and temperature caused a massive explosion of these, you know, cyanobacteria in the Hudson River. So it's hard for us to control that weather, but maybe we can do some other things to help offset this a little bit. I personally like to see Edenton stay like it was in the 1700s. I don't know about you all, but it's not going to be like that. I mean, we do different things, but we certainly, I think, owe it to this community and to the, you know, the communities around us to do what we can to keep these waterways as pristine as we possibly can for not only us, but for the next generation in this area. Yes?
I don't know if this is your wheelhouse or not, but having moved here from Pennsylvania, I was always told the bugs, the midges, the mayflies, all that other stuff, that it's a sign of healthy water. Now this year, the bugs have been outrageous. Now, I don't know if you know anything about bugs. Would the bugs have anything to do with all these blooms, or just coincidence? One has nothing to do
Are you
with
talking about the Rocky Top gnats that made their way down here?
everything? I don't know.
Mayflies, the mayflies. You know,
Blue-green
I
marks?
don't think so. I mean, I'm not gonna say no, because you never know what subtle or interactions there are there. This area, we've seen years here, and we've been here about 40 years now, we've seen years that the mayflies have been pretty bad. You know, but I don't think that there's, I don't think that much, in different areas get more of them than others, like, we weren't too bad in town.
Well, I just, first of all, I want to say thank you to you. As somebody who lives on the Chowan River, we would not have this information from the universities, and you're really good conduit.
Well, I appreciate that. In 2015, I sort of felt that there was a mission in my you know, hat there. But I'm thankful to have all the partners, and, you know, see you guys, we have about probably 5 or 6 folks that do chicken run on a regular basis. Not all of them can come at any one time. So, you know, we're good with that. The CEEG does other things. You know, we put on a big town festival a couple of years ago. You know, we have a specialized program, but honestly, with the blooms as bad as they've been, you know, it's about all we can do to sort of get the research organized. These research projects are not small. I mean, these are big research projects, and there's hopefully, I can hear, hopefully a lot of data that will come out of this that will guide us to do the right thing in this area. I mean, you can't do stuff just stabbing in the dark. You talk to the town council or the county commissioners, they don't have any money. They never have any money, okay? And you ask them for a little bit, you know, they want to know what's going to be done with it and what the outcome is going to be. I mean, bottom line is nobody wants to waste funding. And so, you know, we want to make sure that if we're building a constructed wetland or we're doing something for mitigation, that we're spending the money wisely. And so our research work with these universities can help guide that, and that I think is extremely important. So,
And I'd like to say just one quick thing about the mayflies, and because you are right, so Ephemeroptera, Trichoptera, Plecoptera. So mayflies, stoneflies, and caddisflies, they use that as
the bunker I've been looking for.
yeah, they use that as an indicator. So mayflies are good. If you have those 3 things, then you have a healthy stream. So they do use it. They're an indicator.
buildings, but we can talk offline.
So the macroinvertebrate stuff is really interesting in this area. So what Cheryl's talking about is when they survey streams, a lot of times they'll do what they call a macro index. And so they scoop up pots of like bottom sediment and they'll identify what's in there. Is there any caddisfly larvae? In our area, because it's all swamp, all bottomland swamp, you get a lot of things that aren't even on the list, like leeches, okay? Everybody's, actually leeches are very normal for this body of water here, so you don't want to see the caddisfly too much here, okay? But you will see that over in a fast-running stream in the mountains, all right? Good points.
Colleen, we're gonna have to stop.
Okay.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This might be a dumb question, but is this nationwide, like Colorado River, Mississippi River?
Everybody.
Oh, no, it's international.
It's
India has
it's
this
everybody.
problem.
Yeah, this is not an isolated problem, just like the red tide is not an isolated problem. Of course, we got ahead of that about 40 years ago. And actually, I was a young little science student at the point where the folks were working on some of the toxins that come off of those saltwater organisms, okay, like the red tide and like there's Brevia, which there's a bunch of them that are in the fish body and they're poisons actually, so if you eat the fish, you get really, really sick. So there's a bunch of stuff out there like that, but they were way ahead of that in saltwater. Freshwater is now making its arrival. Well, thank you all very
Thank you
much.
so much.